Excellent. So I first started chatting with Katie maybe over a year ago, maybe even several years ago, or whatever it may be. And we wanted to have Katie on the Cultured Meat and Future Food podcast. And when we found out that schedules aligned, we decided to do it on stage. So here we are. Katie, welcome to the Cultured Meat and Future Food Show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for putting on a great conference.
Awesome. So we're going to get into kind of what Katie is doing and her background. And so, Katie, tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay. I like to answer this question saying I have 5 degrees and I worked on a 6th degree, and I've used them all. So I have undergraduate degrees in chemistry and biology, which I used to be a high school science teacher and a lab scientist. And then I went and earned a master's in community regional planning because I was really fascinated by creating more sustainable cities. So I worked for 7 years as an urban planner, working on implementing progressive planning policies. And then, wanted to go for more education. So I got a master's and PhD in civil engineering, where I wanted to advance my technical knowledge of creating more sustainable cities, focusing on transportation and water resources. As part of that, I published a paper on the Texas cattle industry and the impact on transportation on that. And then I worked as a civil engineer for, I guess it's been over 10 years. I started my own engineering consulting firm. And then I became vegetarian in 1998 and vegan in 2008. And it always been nagging at me that I wanted to do something to do more to end animal slaughter. So I decided it was time for a career change again and to create BioBQ and focus on that. So I worked on a 6th degree.
Oh, wow, okay.
And an online biomedical engineering degree at Johns Hopkins. And then after 2 classes, I was like, I need to stop giving my money to universities and just invest all this money in BioBQ.
Wow, okay, so you actually thought about the idea, and then you wanted to kind of pursue more education before you officially started the company, or did you officially start the company?
So yes, so both. So I officially started the company in December 2018, and at the time it was just me, and I originally thought I would go back to school to develop a technology that would be useful for developing cultured meat. So I actually reached out to professors at the University of Texas at Austin, which is where I'm from, to ask them if they'd be interested in bringing me on as a PhD student, as a second PhD, to develop the technology in a biomedical engineering program. And it was in the fall of 2019 when I met who's now my co-founder, Dr. Janet Zolden. And she convinced me not to go for a second PhD. She said, I'll bring you in as a postdoc. And so she taught me cell culture and tissue engineering. And and we've been working together since the fall of 2019 since.
Wow, okay, and so was she familiar with cultured meat, or did you kind of introduce the idea to her?
I actually introduced it to her, yeah. So, it was a great first meeting with her. I actually emailed several professors, and she was the only one that really expressed interest in it. So I sat down with her and told her about cultured meat, and at that point I'd already been to a cultured meat conference here in San Francisco. This was in 2019. So I just got her up to date, and I had already read some literature, and she, at the meeting, she wasn't like jumping on it at first. She was just like, well, this is really interesting. The next day she called me, she's like, I'm in, I want to work on this, I'm super excited. I think I have a technology coming out of my lab that can help us create the first prototype.
Wow, okay. So I'm going to ask you about what BioBQ is in just a second, but maybe first I want to ask about why brisket?
Oh, yeah. We're in Austin, Texas. So how many of y'all are familiar with how popular brisket is in Texas? Yeah, there's hands up.
The whole
okay.
room, yeah.
Yeah, so y'all get it. So I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Austin. Beef brisket's kind of like, when you think of barbecue, that's one of the major meats you think of. And it just made sense. For a brief time in high school and college, I worked as a barbecue waitress. And so I know how popular beef brisket is. So it just seemed like the natural meat of choice for BioBQ, and no one else, as far as I know, no other cultured meat companies working on it. So, and it's an interesting challenge.
And you've been
Created-
vegan for some time now. So
Yes, since 2008.
Since 2008, okay. And so you would eat brisket before, and you enjoyed it, and you also knew how popular it was. Was that right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay.
When I worked at the barbecue restaurant, beef brisket was my favorite.
Okay,
Yeah.
and maybe we could even break down beef brisket a little bit, especially because in Texas, or in Austin specifically, people like their brisket a certain way, and whether it's extra moist or extra lean or kind of burnt or whatever, burnt ends or whatever it is. Can you tell us about the kind of different types of brisket you can get, or maybe, I wouldn't call it cuts, but kind of like the different ways it's served?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great conversation starter when you talk to somebody that likes barbecue of like, well, how do you like your brisket? So yeah, you get a variety of responses. I mean, typically people like it where you can like peel it apart, and they have specific things they like, how it's seasoned and how long it's smoked, and whether they want a crusty brisket or something, less so. So, yeah.
I see some people in the audience getting hungry. So, okay, so we know what brisket is and why it's so popular in Austin. So, what exactly is BioBQ doing, and kind of, when I put it in the email, I thought it would be maybe too punny for stage, but what is the secret sauce, so to speak?
Yeah, I love that. Barbecue sauce is a critical ingredient for barbecue. It can completely change the experience of eating the meat. So BioBQ, I looked at what the other cultured meat companies were doing, and kind of the mission that I wanted for BioBQ, and it seemed like there were companies working on ground meat, and because beef brisket is not ground meat at all, it's very structured. It has a very distinctive look and texture, and it also has a distinctive, flavor profile and fatty acid profile. It just made sense for BioBQ to, focus on beef brisket, and then generally, because of the way our technology works, to focus on whole cut meats. So BioBQ is a cultured meat company focused on whole cut cultured meats, with our first product being beef brisket.
Okay, wow. And if you haven't announced it, that's fine, but would you say that you're working both on the fat and the muscle and also the structure? Pretty much everything?
Yeah, so we actually work closely with a rancher in Central Texas, and we're able to get both fat and muscle cells. So we've cultured both in the lab.
Wow, okay. And then, wow, okay, that's very exciting. So you're working with your co-founder now. Do you have any other team members, or is it just the early starting point?
Yeah, no, it's great. So we have some professionals that have just reached out to me via LinkedIn or other ways that said, I love your mission, I want to help you. So they have full-time jobs right now while we're fundraising until I can bring them on board full-time. But they've been great to advise and help with the R&D. And then the other thing is we have our own lab space at the Austin Community College Bioscience Incubator. It's an IP-free zone, so it's our IP. And as part of that, there's a biotechnology program for either post-bachelor or they're in high school and doing a dual college degree program. So they're required to have an internship. And so I've had multiple interns through that program, and they're fantastic. They're like great students, and they're super passionate about our mission. And I meet with them once a week to go over the research, and we develop experimental plans. And so yes, I've got a team, and they're super passionate, just like me, about this.
Very cool. And you kind of answered the question I was going to ask. If it's in a university or college setting, IP is kind of a big red flag. But if it's an IP-free zone, then that's really exciting.
Yeah, the Austin Community College started that incubator because Austin isn't necessarily known as the biotech industry heavy area. It's usually San Francisco, Boston, but there's definitely a growing movement in Austin to build up the biotech community, and I'm a part of that. So I'm meeting the founders and investors that are involved with biotech, and so the Bioscience Incubator was a part of that movement to create that industry in Austin.
Very cool. And we've definitely seen a lot of tech move out to Austin as well. I think Facebook, Tesla, all these different groups have started doing more in Austin specifically.
Yes. That's yeah. Austin has changed quite a bit in the last few years because of that. So
would you say, or what would you say that the typical, I think it's called Austinite, thinks of when they think of cultured meat? So far when I talk to anyone, I always bring up what I do, and 99% of the time people are really excited about this. There'll be a small percentage that are, oh, it's
GMO or that's super weird. But sometimes I'll use an analogy that seems to help. Of just think of like a premature baby that's in a mother, and we're just taking that baby and putting it into an intensive care unit. So think of the muscle, the brisket growing in the cattle. We're just taking it into an intensive care unit to grow it there.
That sounds like kind of scary, actually.
It seems to work.
Okay, I'm thinking of the different levels of explanation, and maybe the more kind of biotech folks are like, okay, I totally get that.
Yeah.
So, okay, interesting. And so, I guess, so you said you're fundraising now?
Yes.
Okay, and how has the fundraising experience been? And I guess, we've been hearing about, usually we have a VC panel here at CMS. We didn't this year. Usually we do hear about kind of how the VC industry or the VC market is like. And so, with kind of everything that's happening now, how is it going for you guys? Have you seen VCs starting to pull back? Have you seen that maybe some groups want to do more due diligence, and how has it been?
Yeah, so fundraising has been frustrating experience. So when we first started, we were getting some media attention, like we were featured in Texas Monthly by the BioBQ editor, which was a big deal, and it was a positive article about cultured meat. So that generated interest from investors that came to us expressing interest, but it was just interest. It wasn't like, here, we want to throw money at you. And so we pushed forward. I've been funding it myself to keep this going. And we just keep pushing forward. We created a prototype that we called a brisket bite. It was a whole cut meat prototype. So all the muscle cells are aligned as you would expect in muscle. No scaffold in it. We were able to remove the scaffold. So it was like a whole chunk of meat. And so we felt like that was a solid prototype to go forward to investors going, we have a way forward. And working with a prototype, we realized how the best approach for recreating beef brisket, because it's such a unique cut of meat. But the feedback we're getting from investors is like they are super interested, but they want us to already have the product ready to go. So that's some of the feedback. There's been a couple that have been doubtful that culture meat can meet price parity. And so we just have to emphasize, yes, we're aware of that. We know that self-culture media that is expensive, but we have an idea of how to get the price down. So that's the main feedback. I'm super passionate about this. I'm not giving up. It's going to happen, and I'm building my network of people to try to find that person that can believe in this mission and make this happen.
I guess if fundraising is not frustrating, then you're probably not doing it right, right? So,
Yeah.
so I there's something that's quite interesting is that traditionally it takes a long time to cook brisket and to cook it properly. Sometimes 8+ hours. Could it be that perhaps the BioBQ, and am I saying it right? BioBQ?
BioBQ.
BioBQ. Is it correct to assume that perhaps the BioBQ brisket could be something that could give you like the result of an 8-hour smoked brisket, but the cook time will be way less?
Yes, that's actually something we're super curious to try out once we get a larger size prototype, because we are curious about that. So the reason you have to smoke it for a long time is it has a lot of connective tissue in it. So the brisket is like basically the front part of the cattle, and it's supporting a lot of weight and the movement of the cattle. So there's a lot of connective tissue. So you smoke it to kind of soften that up. And we're going to explore that and see, do we want to recreate brisket exactly as people are used to working with it, which is smoking it for a long time, or do we want to cut back a little bit on that connective tissue and reduce the amount of time that they have to smoke it? So that's a to be determined. We're thinking about it.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I mean, I guess, if you've listened to the podcast before, you might have heard how big of a fan of just egg I am. I feel like it's better than an egg, right? And it's so easy to cook the perfect omelet every time. If you could have like a brisket that you could very easily cook every time, and it ends up being really nice. That's a huge selling point. I think that I don't know if Cyrus is in the audience, but he cooks a mean brisket, and that I can't. So, but okay, cool. So, in a few minutes, we're going to be opening it up to audience Q&A. So, if you do have any questions, feel free to line up on the mic. But I want to ask you about, when you were getting into the industry, and this is, you said, end of 2018. Actually, how did you first hear about cultured meat?
It was actually, I definitely remember the Mark Post 2013 announcement of the hamburger, and I think I knew about it a little bit before then. And I knew immediately once I heard that was the win-win solution, because growing up in Texas, I'm constantly invited to barbecues. That's just what you do. I grew up going to barbecue parties, and when I became vegetarian and vegan, of course, it became more difficult for me, and I got to the point where I would start to decline going to barbecue gatherings because I was just like, there's just nothing for me to eat. And so when I heard about cultured meat, I was just like, that's it. That's what we have to do.
Wow, okay. And because of your biotech background, you heard about it even before the Mark Post announcement in 2013?
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what it was, but yeah. I think actually New Harvest. Somehow I stumbled across New Harvest at that time.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. And so when you were starting to kind of, get into resources and learning more about the technology as you were about to start the company, what were some of the resources that you looked into to kind of learn about cultured meat?
Yeah, so definitely diving into the literature. I mean, I have a PhD, so I'm, very comfortable going into the literature and looking at what's happening there and just paying attention to the news and seeing what companies are starting up. And then once I met my co-founder, Dr. Janet Zolden, in the fall of 2019, then she was a great guide for helping me understand more of the cell culture and tissue engineering aspects. And, getting into the lab and actually working with the cells myself and seeing kind of like, where there's issues and things to think about. And that was the best way to get into it.
Wow, okay, cool. It looks like we have a question. Go ahead.
Hi. First, Hook'em Horns.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yes. I was just wondering if you can comment on any advantages or disadvantages of opening a cultivated meat company in a city like Austin compared to the Bay Area.
Yeah, so yes, we're in cattle country, like Texas. I was talking to somebody about this, like we talk about countries that have food insecurity, whereas Texas does not have that. We are surrounded by cattle ranches and meat, like it's just everywhere. So I have wondered how it would be received in Austin, but so far, like I mentioned, it's when I talk to people about it, people are really excited. I think part of it is Austin is very much a tech progressive city, and they're very open to new products, and so I'm encountering that. But even when I travel to Dallas, for instance, I'll talk to people there, and they're excited. So, yeah, I'm encouraged by the feedback I get when I talk to people about this.
Thank you.
Great, and I think we have another question.
Yeah, hey, so we chatted yesterday
Yes.
About your amazing prototype and how you have these like beautiful aligned myofibers and stuff, but I can't remember, I don't think I asked you, did you actually eat it? Or if you can comment on the taste, texture, and color, but if not, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, that's fine, great question. So yes, we had a large enough prototype produced that we could cook it. I decided to not try it because I haven't had meat in over 20 years, so I'd be a terrible judge of whether the meat was comparable. So my co-founder, who's an omnivore, was happy to eat it, and she described it as it was chewy, and she felt like it was close to the texture. It was, at that particular time, that particular prototype was muscle cells only, so we didn't have the cultured fat at that point, but she felt like that was the only thing missing to really recreate the meat sensory experience with the prototype.
Wow, great. And of course, the topic of discussion in a lot of these conferences is, I guess we would call it hybridization. Do you plan to go to market with plant-based materials as well?
Yes, we've been going back and forth on that for a while on whether to create like a plant-based brisket, because as a vegan, I will say that I have not tried a vegan brisket that
There are vegan briskets out there?
Yeah, sort of. They label it as such, but not. It doesn't really look or taste like it. So yeah. So I thought, well, there is a gap in the vegan meat market to have a good brisket that looks like brisket, tastes like brisket, and so I have had that in mind. But I think because we feel so confident and the approach that we're taking with constructing beef brisket with our technological approach, that we just want to focus our energy on that. So I think we've reached the point now where it's like, maybe we can do the vegan brisket at another time, but we're really focused on creating this vegan, or the cultured brisket.
I see, okay. So you would be open to, let's say the cultured brisket goes very well, you would be open to also creating some sort of like plant-based brisket as well?
Yeah, the spectrum. So the plant-based vegan brisket plus a hybrid that has the cultured cells mixed with some type of plant or fungi-based structure,
right,
and then the cultured meat. Yeah.
Okay, and maybe not for the short term, because I know that will probably change. But in the long term, do you envision this as a CPG product that people can buy off the shelf?
Yeah, so we want to go to market first through barbecue restaurants. We already have a barbecue restaurant chain that's super interested in this. So once we have enough product, they want to put it in their test kitchen and season it and smoke it. So we have that down, and I'm talking to some other barbecue restaurants in Texas. And just as a side note, like, it's not just Southern barbecue. We're also looking at Korean barbecue, as another venue for this meat product. So yeah, we think that's going to be a better approach, because we want the pit masters, the people that know how to season brisket, to be the first to introduce this to the public, and then eventually we would want to work with grocery stores to get on the shelves once people become familiar with it.
Wow, okay, so Austin already has a lot of good barbecue spots, but then I think the lines will be quite long for whoever has the first cultured brisket.
Yeah, I agree. I think so, yeah.
So there was, what is it called? Franklin's is the one that most, I guess, out-of-towners know is the best barbecue? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So, well, and now you have been plant-based for a long time, but are there any other really kind of hot spots that people think of when they think of brisket in Austin?
Well, like Texas Monthly puts together like a top 50 barbecue places, so that's a good resource to look at. Some of them are in Austin, some of them are scattered around the state, but yeah, I've been vegan for such a long time. I would not be a good judge of that.
Right. Okay. And I see Cyrus here. He's the one that was making that really good brisket. Cyrus from our team. Excellent. So I want to, as we start to wrap up, I want to ask you about kind of advice that you have to other folks, specifically those that are currently in some sort of academic program. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for them if they're interested in getting into this field?
Well, from my experience with working with interns, for instance, I really appreciate interns that have the passion and the drive and realize that I'm a very busy startup founder, and they know that they need to, produce, like, be involved, and I'm going to meet with them every week. So I think being proactive and, if you're in a university and you want to be involved with Culture Meat, I think offering your time to a startup and helping in that way is huge, because then you can understand kind of like what it's like to go through R&D with a cultured meat company, and then also trying to gain the skills for the science part, like cell culture. But I've also had interns that are more interested in the marketing and communications, and that's been super helpful as well. So.
And you're currently full-time. Is your co-founder still working at the university, right?
Well, yeah. So since we're still working on fundraising, I actually have 2 full-time jobs. So I work a lot.
Okay.
So I have my own engineering consulting business, and I basically take the money from that and I pump it into BioBQ.
Wow.
So
okay.
I work very long hours I'll switch during my day from working on an engineering design project to going into the lab or working on a pitch deck or having investor meetings.
Wow, okay, and that's what investors like to hear. So if there are any investors listening in or in the audience, this is definitely a dedicated founder story right here.
Yes.
Excellent. And so what is the best way to get in touch with you and the BioBQ team?
Okay, so I'm on LinkedIn, Katie Cam. I also have a website. For some reason, biobq.com was already taken. It's not an active site, but I couldn't have it, and I was already...
BIOBQ.com is taken?
Yeah, I was already taking. I was like, surprised by that. But so I did BioBQing. So it's BIOBQing.com. My contact information's on there as well. But LinkedIn's a great way to get a hold of me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we have one more question.
Hi, I'm Gabe. I work at Vitro Labs. Thanks for a great talk. I was really interested by, and it just came up again, that you have a super diverse background. You've done a lot of different things. I totally want to pick your brain on urban planning and that sort of stuff later too.
Okay.
But how has your civil engineering, urban, like all your different background, how do you, like, does that come up a lot, like, in your BioBQ work? Like, how much does that, like, influence your day-to-day, and, like, how can you leverage that, like, diversity of thought?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I definitely think about my life choices, and I feel like my CEO role at BioBQ is a culmination of all that experience. So, you know, I used to be a high school science teacher, so I'm used to working with the younger population and getting them interested and involved with science. So that comes into play with managing the interns I have. And it's something I very much enjoy because I'm very much a proponent of getting more students involved with STEM. So that's a passion project. And then my PhD in civil engineering was all about sustainability and transportation and water resources, which is directly, related to why we're pursuing cultured meat, because of the huge impact transportation water resources that animal production has. And so I have that knowledge of why we're doing this. And then, of course, my undergraduate degrees in biology and chemistry gives me a solid, background, the nomenclature. I can dive into the cultured meat literature, no problem. It's, so yeah, and the community regional planning, I was very much involved with policy and working with politicians, so I'm super comfortable working with regulators, working with the public policymakers. So yeah, I'm doing what I absolutely love. It's a passion project. I'm super happy with where I'm at, and yeah, I want this to be a success.
Thanks so much. And after just hearing that great opening talk about regulations, maybe you can be helping out on that front too.
Yeah.
Because you don't have enough going on. But.
Yeah. My bandwidth is, I've got a lot going on, but yeah, I want to help in some way.
Great, and also a great question to kind of tie into creativity and how we could use that background for what we're doing in this field. So
yes.
Great. Well, any last insights you'd like to share before we close off?
No, I guess the main thing is just keep talking to people about cultured meat and spreading the word. I'm still surprised when I meet people that haven't heard of cultured meat or don't quite understand it. So I think we have a role in this room to continue to talk to people, even strangers. If you're standing in line, just mention it and start spreading the word about what cultured meat is. Use my analogy I mentioned earlier or not. Just figure out what works best for conveying what cultured meat is. And I think that's really big right now, because people think it's science fiction and they don't even think that we're even thinking about this. And so I think that's like the biggest thing that we can do right now to get the world ready for this.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.